Over the years, what has been the binding force of the Carbon County community? Has it been the main streets in towns or the business districts? Has it been the schools, private or public, or a college or university? Has it been the institutions such as city halls, the museums, or even monuments? Or is it the religious organizations and churches? A community is its people, its varied and diverse group of human beings who all have a history. That history in Carbon County goes back a long way, long before there were towns. The history that documents what happened in the area in public manner began on January 15, 1891, when S.K. King began a newspaper business, in the town of Price, which at the time had 900 residents. He named the weekly paper the Eastern Utah Telegraph, denoted by the best and fastest communication that was generally known to the public during its day. That name only lasted a few months as King bailed out of running the paper after only a short time, and a series of owners and publishers came through the office of the small publication. It was soon renamed the Eastern Utah Advocate. In 1898, a young man wandered into town, fancying himself to be everything from an insurance salesman to one who gave out legal advice. He also had a journalism degree from the prestigious journalism school at the University of Missouri. His name was Robert Crockett, and for the next 30 years plus, he would have a tremendous impact on what people in the area read and thought. He purchased the Advocate and began to run it his way. Crockett ran the paper the way he saw fit, and in those days most small-town papers were very political, with Crockett saying that his paper was of a Republican stance. That same year, however, the new owner suddenly faced competition in a town that now had a couple of thousand residents. A new paper was begun by Dexter Smith, and he called it the Carbon County News. The relationship between the two papers became very contentious, particularly after W.C. Benfer took over the News in January of 1912. Up until 1914, the two battled it out, not only on the stands, but sometimes even on the streets. Employees of the two papers sometimes got into scuffles, and at least one stabbing and an incident of gunfire was related to the two papers' supporters getting into it at times. Whether he was tired of the animosity or his other business interests took on new meaning, in 1913 Crockett sold the paper to W. L. Waltrus, who gave him a small down payment and promised to make monthly installments. Over the next year, Waltrus also fought the good fight with the competition, but he was not managing things very well. Apparently not one installment payment was ever made. Crockett decided to take the paper back, but Waltrus fought him in court. In a short fight, Crockett won in the paper's office, equipment, and an old press back. However, in the original agreement, somehow Waltrus had been signed over the name of the paper, and he did not relinquish that in court. Consequently, Crockett was left with most of what he needed, but the name he had used for the publication for almost 18 years was gone. Crockett consequently began publishing the paper under the banner of The Sun. Waltrus had, however, kept a new press that Crockett had installed and continued to print the Eastern Utah Advocate until July 2nd. For that month, the county actually had 3 newspapers. Waltrus then sold the name of his paper to Benfer, who immediately changed the name of the Carbon County News to the News Advocate and claimed that they were now the original newspaper in Carbon County. This was a move that tweaked Crockett's ego, and the newspaper war began anew. For a short time the contention ensued, but then Benfer sold the news to Harry W. Cooper, who fought with the Crockett some, but not much. Cooper died in 1923, and at that point his wife, Grace A. Cooper, took over, and then the papers got along much better, even though they were competitors. Crockett died in 1930, and by this time the Sun and the News Advocate were in financial trouble as the Depression approached. Crockett's son took over the paper. In 1929, Cooper sold her rights to the News to William Englehart. Both papers were ready to fold when they were sold to Joseph Ashbury in 1932. He merged the two into each other, naming the new paper the Sun Advocate. He tried to manage the paper from Richfield, where he owned the Richfield Reaper, but that became untenable, and he sold it to Val Cowles and Hal G. McKnight in 1935. McKnight became the sole owner in 1948. In 1966, he sold the paper to Robert Finney's group, which was called the Sun Advocate Publishing Company. In 1975, the Helper Journal, which began as the Helper Times in 1919, merged with the Sun Advocate and was for a time known as the Sun Advocate Journal. From that time until 1994, the paper was owned by various groups, mostly from outside the area. That year, Brems Communications of San Diego, California bought the paper and owned it until October of 2018 when Emory Telecom purchased it and merged it with their paper, the ETV10 News. Over the 125 plus years that the paper and its ancestors have existed, the paper noted the history of the area weekly. Major local stories included the collapse of the Mammoth Dam in 1917 to the near collapse of the first Schofield Dam in 1927. The paper took on all the mine disasters in the area, from Winter Quarters to Castlegate to Wilburg to Crandall Canyon. It noted the rise and the fall of politicians. It noted the vast number of murders that took place in the early days of the county up through the 1950s. And then, of course, there were all the effects that the wars had on the county, from rationing during World War II to the huge loss of local lives and all the battles that were fought. But while the Sun Advocate was hard-hitting on serious news over the years, it also showed a lighter and more happy side of living in Carbon County. Events like Pleasant Valley Days, International Days, and the Helper Art Festival were mainstays. Parades were another major event that was covered well. And of course, sports of various kinds that took place year-round were important to the community. The Sun Advocate was an award-winning paper with 3 General Excellence Awards in 3 years in the late 1940s and early 50s, and a winner of the award 7 times from 1999 until 2018, the last year of its publication. More importantly, though, were the Community Service Awards the paper got over the years, 4 to be exact, beating out even large Salt Lake dailies for being of service to their community in various ways, from fund drives to the No Grave Unadorned project, for which it won 2 awards. So while people make up the community, the Sun Advocate was one of those institutions that bound people together with common news and events reported passionately and with an eye to making Carbon County a better place.